A house too big to fail. On a cold January morning in 1901, a funeral procession wound its way through the Blue Ridge Mountains. Inside the stone walls of a 175,000 square foot chateau, larger than the royal palaces it tried to emulate, a 38-year-old heir lay in state. His name was George Washington Vanderbilt II, and with his death came a question nobody wanted to voice out loud. How do you save the largest private home ever built in America when its owner is gone and its bills are only growing? This is the story of a luxury dream that was too ambitious to survive. A home born from wealth so vast it seemed infinite until it was not. A story about a paradise carved from wilderness, and the slow realization that paradise came with a price no one expected to pay. To understand how the Biltmore estate became both a monument to the Gilded Age and a financial nightmare for nearly everyone who inherited it, we need to rewind to the undeveloped hill of western North Carolina. Before the trains, before the tourists, before the chateau cast its shadow over the valley. The boy who bought a mountain. On a spring afternoon in 1888, a shy, bookish young man stepped off a train in Asheville. He was not the typical Vanderbilt, no bombast, no ambition for railroads or shipping empires. George Vanderbilt preferred libraries to boardrooms, and solitude to society. But he did have one thing in common with the rest of his family: an almost unfathomable inheritance. At just 26 years old, George could afford practically anything. What he wanted was simpler, at least at first: clean mountain air and a place to read. Yet the mountains stirred something in him. The rugged slopes of Pisgah Forest looked untouched, almost mythic. And so, with a kind of quiet audacity, George began buying land. Not just a farm here or a hillside there, entire mountainsides. He acquired parcels from struggling farmers, speculators, and timber outfits, eventually assembling more than 125,000 acres, a private kingdom. But land was only the beginning. What George planned to build on it would dwarf anything America had ever seen. And to make that dream real, he would need two men who understood grandeur better than anyone in the country. The architect, the landscape, and the impossible blueprint. George hired Richard Morris Hunt, the first American architect to study at Paris's École des Beaux-Arts, and the mind behind the opulent Breakers and Marble House. For the grounds, George turned to Frederick Law Olmsted, the designer of Central Park, who surveyed the steep terrain and frowned. The land was beautiful, yes, but also scarred from years of logging and poor farming. Olmsted warned Vanderbilt that restoring it would take decades and staggering resources. Forests would need replanting, streams would need redirecting, soil had to heal. George didn't hesitate. Hunt sketched a vision inspired by the great chateau of the Loire Valley: 250 rooms, 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, and a banquet hall with a 7-story ceiling. Olmsted reshaped entire valleys, planting millions of trees and designing miles of carriage roads that curved just enough to hide what lay around each bend. Workers arrived by the hundreds, then thousands. Stone was quarried on site. A brick factory was built just to supply the estate. A special railroad line fed directly into the construction zone. By 1895, when Biltmore opened for its grand Christmas Eve unveiling, the project had cost an amount, whispered but never officially recorded. Estimates hover between $150 million and $200 million in today's dollars. The estate was a triumph, a miracle, a fantasy made real. But fantasies have upkeep, and Biltmore's upkeep was unlike anything America had ever known. At the end of this chapter, one quiet truth lingered behind the celebrations. If the estate ever stopped expanding, it would start collapsing. A palace without a king, George Vanderbilt enjoyed the estate for only 6 years before disaster struck. In 1901, complications from an appendectomy took his life unexpectedly. He left behind a widow, Edith Stuyvesant Vanderbilt, and a 10-year-old daughter, Cornelia. He also left them a home that required a staff of over 400 people, constant repairs, farmland, forestry operations, and guests who expected royal-level hospitality. The estate hemorrhaged money. The Gilded dream was becoming a very expensive nightmare. Edith, however, was no passive heiress. She renegotiated debts, sold overseas properties, and ran Biltmore with the precision of a corporate executive. But America was changing. The Gilded Age was ending. The country was moving toward modernity, efficiency, restraint, not palaces on mountaintops. Then came the blow that would permanently reshape the estate. Edith was forced to consider selling parts of the land simply to keep the house standing. In 1914, just before World War I, she made a decision that would change environmental history, and yet it would also foreshadow the slow dismemberment of the Vanderbilt Mountain Kingdom, the forest that saved the mansion. Facing staggering taxes and operating costs, Edith sold 86,000 acres of the Biltmore lands to the federal government. It became the nucleus of the Pisgah National Forest, one of the first national forests in the eastern United States. The sale eased the financial pressure, but only temporarily. When Cornelia came of age, she inherited not just the glory of Biltmore, but its burdens. She grew restless under the ornate ceilings and the expectations they carried. By the 1920s, America was roaring. Jazz, short skirts, and personal freedom defined the decade. A 250-room chateau felt like a relic. Cornelia and her husband, British diplomat John Cecil, made a controversial decision. They opened the Biltmore estate to the public. On March 15, 1930, visitors paid $2 each to walk through the mansion Vanderbilt had once called his Little Mountain Escape. It was a shocking reversal. America's grandest private home was now part museum, part survival tactic. But even with ticket sales, the estate was barely staying afloat, and soon a different crisis, bigger than the estate and bigger than the Vanderbilts, would reshape the nation: the Great Depression and the vanishing heiress. During the Depression, Biltmore became both a refuge and an albatross. Jobs on the estate supported families when local industries collapsed, and Asheville found identity and income through the mansion. But privately, the Vanderbilts were strained. By 1934, Cornelia, frustrated with the expectations of aristocracy, abandoned the estate entirely. She left for Europe, remarried, and never returned to live at Biltmore again. Her sons remained in North Carolina to manage the property, but the shadow of the Great Depression lingered. Maintenance costs mounted. The mansion's sheer size ensured that even closing off wings saved only a fraction of expenses. World War II brought a brief moment of unexpected drama. The National Gallery of Art, fearing air raids in Washington, quietly stored priceless paintings, including works by Vermeer and Rembrandt, inside the Biltmore estate. The secret kept the mansion relevant, but not profitable. By mid-century, the estate stood at a crossroads. Either it evolved into a modern attraction, or it would become the largest abandoned home in the country. One man would take on that challenge, a descendant with the unusual combination of business pragmatism and family loyalty. The heir who turned a burden into a business. In the 1960s and 1970s, William A.V. Cecil, Cornelia's son, took full control of the estate. He was determined to do what his ancestors, for all their vision, had never managed: make Biltmore financially sustainable. He modernized operations, invested in marketing, added a winery, expanded tourism infrastructure, and embraced the idea that the estate was no longer a private home. It was an enterprise, Against all odds, it worked. Visitor numbers rose, revenue stabilized. The estate began to pay for itself for the first time in its history. But the transformation came with a cost. Biltmore became a brand, not a retreat. It became a business, not a sanctuary. The dream survived, but only by becoming something its creator never intended. And yet, perhaps that is the story of every Gilded Age monument. To endure, it must outgrow the world that built it. A legacy built on contradictions. Today, the Biltmore estate is a thriving tourist destination. Over 1 million visitors each year walk through rooms once meant for a single family. They sip wine grown on lands that were once overgrazed pasture. They stay in hotels rising on grounds where Vanderbilt once rode alone on horseback. And yet the contradictions remain. A house designed for solitude now welcomes crowds. A private vision survives only through public access. A dream meant to last forever was nearly undone within a decade. The Biltmore estate is both a masterpiece and a cautionary tale, a monument to ambition, and a reminder that no fortune, however vast, is infinite. The nightmare that refused to die. George Vanderbilt believed he was building a personal paradise. Instead, he created a responsibility that outlived him, burdened his heirs, and reshaped an entire region. But the real miracle is not that Biltmore survived its darkest decades. It is that the dream, fragile, expensive, extravagant, was kept alive by people who had every reason to let it go. In the end, the Biltmore estate stands as a testament to a truth larger than the mansion itself. Some dreams are too big to maintain, but some are too meaningful to abandon. And that is how a luxury dream became a nightmare, and then against all expectations became a legacy.